And now, without any further delay, let's get going with today's event, sponsored by Factor Trust and hosted by American Banker. I would now like to turn things over to your moderator, Mike Sisk.
Thanks very much, Aaron, and I would like to welcome the audience once again. We are grateful that you've chosen to share some of your day with us. We know that your time is valuable, and we will honor that today with what I am confident will be an enlightening 60 minutes or so of discussion. Once again, our topic today is what to know about the CFPB's proposed rule and ATR. And my name is Michael Sisk. I will be our moderator today. I've been a New York-based journalist for about 20 years, and I've had stints as investor editor at Red Herring and editor-at-large at U.S. Banker. My articles have also appeared in American Banker, Barron's, Crane's New York Business, Inc., Institutional Investor, Strategy and Business, and Worth. However, more important than my background are the backgrounds of our two excellent speakers, and I'd like to introduce them both to you now. The first is Barbara Sinsley. She is General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer, and she is nationally known for her intelligent, aggressive representation of servicers, creditors, debt collectors, and debt buyers, with a focus on developing and improving compliance management systems and handling CFPB, FTC, and Attorneys General investigations and examinations. She is AV rated by Martindale-Hubbell. Barb practiced with Barron, Neuberger, and Sinsley from 2007 to 2011 and was counsel to Barron and Neuberger from 2011 to 2016. Prior to that, Barb was Vice President of Asset Acceptance Capital Corp. During the time when that company launched its IPO. She previously served as General Counsel of DBA International. In this capacity, she negotiated significant legislation impacting the operations of the collections industry. In 2010, she obtained a rare FTC closing letter for a large debt collector in the deceased collection industry, and in 2011, she had a case brought before the U.S. Supreme Court in a Telephone Consumer Protection Act case, MIMS versus Arrow, which was heard before the U.S. Supreme Court on November 28, 2011. She is a frequent speaker and author and is a member of CWAG, Conference of Western Attorney General Association, and the National Association of Retail Collection Attorneys, co-chair in-house counsel roundtable. She has been a panelist on numerous FTC workshops and has given testimony before numerous state legislatures. And we are very, very pleased to have Barb with us today. And joining Barb is Dan Richard. Dan is VP Analytics and Product Strategy. Dan is responsible for driving strategy, planning, and execution for analytics, product strategy, and data acquisition. He is an expert at leading the scoping, analytical development, and strategic delivery of scoring models and attribute suites for business use cases, including acquisition, risk, fraud, direct marketing, account management, collections, and enhancement of high-volume data processes. His industry vertical expertise includes auto, communications, retail banking, retail card, underbanked, lines of credit, third-party debt purchase, and collections. Prior to joining Factor Trust, Dan served as Equifax, first as a statistical consultant, and most recently as a senior director in enterprise analytics. In his tenure with Equifax, Dan managed a team of statisticians, scoped and managed analytics, product development, and research initiatives, drove third-party analytics partnerships, and influenced business initiatives as the primary analytics expert on a cross-functional strategic task force. Dan was also the lead developer of numerous actionable scoring models and attributable suites. Before Equifax, Dan was a senior product analyst at Scoring Solutions, where he developed actionable consumer scoring models and attributes, crafted score-driven decision strategies and monitoring processes, and provided analytical consulting services to clients. Dan holds a MS in statistics and a BS in industrial engineering from Georgia Tech. And we are also very, very honored to have Dan with us as well. And just before I get into the meat of the program here, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. The first is that we do have time at the end for Q&A, and you don't have to wait until the end to put your question into the queue. So sort of as the spirit moves you, please get that question in there throughout the hour, and we'll make every effort to get to it in the time that we've got. Anyone's question that we don't get to today, we will follow up afterward. So, please, your voice will be heard. Ask anything you'd like. We also have a poll that's just, I think, coming up just after my introduction here, actually. And I always encourage 100% participation. We do share the results with everyone here, and it's a nice level set to sort of see where we all stand on the issue that we've come together to discuss. So if you could weigh in on that, that would be That would be wonderful. And I think, let's see here, just a standard disclaimer here that we like to show, we sort of have to, but that the views and opinions of the speakers expressed herein are solely those of the presenters and not American Banker. Pretty straightforward there. So that brings us to our first, and I believe only poll question today. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just read the question, read the possible answers, and hopefully in that amount of time, everyone will have had a chance to weigh in. So the question is, have you read the CFPB proposed rule on payday, vehicle title, and certain high-cost installment loans? Have you read the whole thing? Have you read part of it? Yes, partially. No, you are not planning to do so, or you haven't yet done so, or you are not doing so and don't plan to do so because it's not applicable. So if everyone could just take a moment and weigh in on that question. And once again, you've either read it, you're partway through it, you haven't begun it yet, but you plan to, or you're not going to because it's not applicable in your case. So, okay, that's probably, everyone probably knows if they've read it or not, so let me go ahead and share the results now. And so just about exactly 39.4 said yes partially, and 39.4 said no, not yet. 15.7 have read the whole thing already. So thank you very much for participating in that. That's helpful. And let me ask Dan, those results what you expected, or surprising, or what do you think?
Well, it's interesting. It looks like we've got a fairly diverse assortment of exposure levels to the rule amongst our audience members, so that's great. And for those already familiar with the rule, I trust the content and analysis that we provide today will only add to your growing knowledge base. And for those still gaining their understanding, we provide today's insights as a way to introduce you to what's coming from the CFPB, and we offer steps to take now to make sure that you're ready.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. So, with that, why don't you take it away, Dan?
Great. Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll start us off with the high-level concept of ability to repay, and then Barb will walk us through the key elements of the CFPB's proposed rule. I'll then lead us through practical considerations for compliance and risk and discuss actions that lenders can take now to ensure that they're ready for rule implementation. Lastly, we'll finish up with the interactive question and answer session that Mike mentioned, and he'll moderate that. So let's begin by recognizing that in much of the lending industry today, the concept of ability to repay is nothing new. Many lenders already evaluate capacity to pay metrics in their decisioning processes. Existing metrics may include consumer income, debt to income, or other measures that speak to the consumer's financial capacity to make loan payments. And some lenders will capture these metrics due to regulatory requirements, while others have integrated them into their decision strategies based on an observed correlation with risk or profitability. The CFPB's latest rule proposal on payday, vehicle title, and certain high-cost installment loans brings with it a new set of requirements for lenders of these credit products. Impacted lenders who don't already assess ability to repay will need to begin doing so. For lenders who do already make ability to repay determinations, the new rule could make this process more complex. Fortunately, Factor Trust is uniquely positioned to help lenders comply with the new rule since we have served the innovative short-term lending market for over 10 years. We are an alternative credit bureau specializing in the loan types impacted by this rule, so we have a high level of commitment to this market. Furthermore, we were also recently honored as the fastest growing private credit bureau per the Inc. 5000. We've seen a great deal of growth in the alternative lending space during our tenure, so it's exciting to grow along with the industry as fast as we have. Taking a quick peek inside the credit database, you'll see the types of lenders that contribute data to Factor Trust have a very large overlap with those lenders whose loans will be covered by the new CFPB rule. We have a reciprocity-driven business model in which lenders pull our FCRA credit data and contribute their own loan data in real time through our proprietary loan reporting process. And finally, Factor Trust has been studying the potential impact of the CFPB's proposed rule on the industry for quite some time. In our latest Underbanked Index, we found that a significant portion of the underbanked consumer population, nearly 70%, could potentially lose access to short-term credit under the new rule proposal. We also discovered great potential for lenders to blend consumer capacity and risk scores together to enhance their risk decisioning. At this time, I'll pass it off to Barb to take us through the CFPB's proposed rule.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. In June of this year, the CFPB released the proposed rule and request for public comment on payday loans, vehicle title loans, and certain high-cost installment loans. For purposes of this webinar, we will use the term proposed rule. The proposed rule was published on July 22, 2016 in the Federal Register. For my portion of the presentation, I will be covering certain timing matters, who is impacted by the proposed rule, lenders' requirements to conclude an ability to repay assessment, and lastly, I will discuss a new entity called a Registered Information System. So to begin, let's look at the background to the proposed rule. As we're aware, the CFPB proposes to end what it calls debt traps, or, as the CFPB describes it, getting into a taxi just to ride across town and finding yourself in a ruinously expensive cross-country journey. The proposed rule, published on July 22nd, is 1,334 pages long and invites or solicits comments. The proposed rule would identify a practice as an unfair practice for a lender to make a covered loan without first reasonably determining that a consumer has the ability to repay. In other words, it would be a UDAP if a lender failed to conduct an ATR analysis. We know many of you are preparing comments due in October to the CFPB proposed rule, so let's look at some potential timing for the proposed rule to become a final rule. The proposed rule will be effective as the final rule 15 months after the publication of the rule in the Federal Register. If you look at our second column on this slide, we have set a hypothetical publication period in the Federal Register for the fall of 2017. Therefore, with a 15-month publication period in this hypothetical, we would be looking at an effective date of early 2019. As Dan will discuss later, there's a great deal of preparation needed in order to be ready for the final rule, and the publication date is unknown. However, publication in the Federal Register could be as short as we've seen 9 months, or much longer as we've seen up to 3 years. So next, let's discuss who's impacted by the proposed rule. Generally speaking, those impacted by the proposed rule would be any lender making a covered loan not exempted by the rule. A covered loan is generally defined in the proposed rules as, first, a loan with a payment term of 45 days or less, or a loan with a term of 45 days or longer with an all-in percentage rate greater than 36%, and which is repaid directly from the consumer's account or income or secured by the consumer's vehicle. Also included in covered loans are some balloon loans that require that the consumer pay the loan in a single payment or repay through at least one payment that is twice as large as any other payment under the loan. Okay, so now you've determined that you're impacted. What should lenders do next to review their reasonable determination of ability to repay? Let's discuss the 6 sections of the definitions found in sections 1041.5A 1 through 6, which are the definition sections. The first one is the definition of basic living expenses. This means expenditures other than major financial obligations, which is the next definition we'll get to. This definition is goods, services, such as those necessary to maintain health, welfare, and ability to produce income. The second definition is major financial obligations. This means housing expenses and minimum and delinquent debt obligations and government-ordered child support. The third definition is National Consumer Report. This means a consumer report as defined in the FCRA as maintained on a national basis. For those following along under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, that is Section 603P. The next definition is net income. Net income means the total amount a consumer receives after deductions, taxes. As a side comment, I note that this definition did not take into account consumers living on a cash basis, such as the service industry. The next definition is payment under a covered loan. This means the combined dollar amount of the payment the consumer is making, including principal, interest, and fees. Lastly, there's the definition of residual income. This means the sum of the net income a lender projects for the consumer minus the lender's projections for major financial obligations. So in making this reasonable determination, a lender must make a reasonable conclusion. So under the CFPB proposed rules, a lender must conclude the following elements. And I should note, as a lawyer, that the reasonably conclude section is not defined and will be open for interpretation. The first element a lender must conclude is basic living expenses. This means a lender must look at the goods and services which the consumer needs for their health, welfare, and ability to produce income. The next element a lender must conclude is what are the major financial obligations of the consumer. This would mean the consumer must look at the housing expenses by using the consumer's written statement. The third element a lender must conclude is called presumptions of unaffordability. Generally speaking, presumptions of unaffordability means that the lender is presuming that the consumer does not have the ability to repay a loan during 30 days of another covered short-term loan. The CFPB calls this the cooling off period. I note that Dan will later discuss high-frequency borrowing activity. Okay, so we've looked at the background, some definitions, and elements of ATR. Dan and I had a few ideas we thought merited some consideration for discussion today. So these are our considerations. Our first consideration relates to basic living expenses. Under the proposed rule, the CFPB has the lender concluding what the ATR is, but perhaps the CFPB should also consider that a consumer can offer their own stated living expenses. Therefore, perhaps the question or the consideration should be, how does the consumer express or conclude their own expenses? So consider this. Rather than using the term verifying consumer expenses, perhaps the better term is validating consumers' stated living expenses and then comparing them to similarly situated consumers. Our second consideration relates to major financial obligations and the feasibility of lenders to validate the consumer's stated financial obligations. The industry is already familiar with pulling from alternative credit bureaus or pulling from a national credit bureau, but lenders should be able to perform a statistical comparison as well of stated application elements against geographic distributions. Lastly, Dan and I's third consideration relates to the term presumption of unaffordability. Perhaps the CFPB should consider there should be some reward for positive propensity to repay. That means the CFPB should consider rewarding positive payment behavior. Okay, so let's go back to the proposed rule. The CFPB has presented a new entity called a Registered Information System, or RIS, for reporting and receiving consumer information. Under the proposed rule and the discussion of an RIS, there are certain duties for lenders to work with this new RIS. So what are the duties for the lenders? First, a lender has a duty at loan consummation. The duties at loan consummation are as follows: identifying the loan, identifying the specific consumer, identifying the loan type, identifying what is the amount borrowed, identifying if it's a closed-ended loan, or identifying if it's an open-ended loan. So those are the duties at loan consummation. Secondly, during the pendency of the loan, there are reporting obligations on the outstanding loans. The lender has the duty to provide updates in a reasonable time period. Thirdly, a lender has a duty when the loan ceases to be outstanding. If a loan ceases to be outstanding, a lender must give the date it ceases to be outstanding, and a lender must provide whether the amount is paid in full and other amounts paid on the loan. As my last slide, let's look at the requirements for eligibility to be an RIS and what happens when the RISs are in place. As an initial matter, there are strict barriers to entry to be an RIS. In order to be an RIS, the RIS will have to execute on rigorous reporting and receiving capability standards. And the RIS will be required to submit to CFPB oversight and control. So once these registered information systems are in place, what are lenders going to have to do? Lenders will be required to obtain a report from one and report to all. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this back over to Dan and ask, Dan, how can we do all of this?
Thanks, Barb. Barb has given us an inside look at the rule. Now what do lenders need to do? Armed with an understanding of the rule proposal, lenders can start preparing to integrate new components into their decisioning processes. First is a set of consumer borrowing patterns that the CFPB views as evidence that a consumer may be getting into what it calls a debt trap and taking on loans that he or she cannot afford. Thus, lenders who are not currently accessing an alternative consumer credit file during underwriting will need to begin doing so in order to perform these checks on recent consumer borrowing behavior. Not all of these criteria apply to all covered loan types. The lender should become educated on which checks they will need to perform. The various criteria listed here are among the most prescriptive parts of the rule proposal. These can serve as knockout rules early in a decision waterfall to determine the consumer's eligibility to borrow. Lenders may also implement internal scrub rules based on these criteria ahead of a credit file check to detect on-us activity that renders the consumer ineligible. For such ineligible consumers, pulling a credit file to perform the checks would not be necessary. Next is the calculation of residual income, which at its core is an algebraic dollar amount calculation of net income minus major financial obligations minus the new loan payment amount. The resulting dollar amount must be sufficiently high for the consumer to afford basic living expenses without defaulting. The rule proposal does not specify a particular method that a lender must use to determine an amount of funds that a consumer requires to meet basic living expenses for an applicable period. Nor is a lender required to itemize the basic living expenses of each consumer. The key term the CFPB uses here is reasonableness. In light of the CFPB's hypothesis that consumers that have sufficient residual income would likely be able to make loan payments and meet basic living expenses without defaulting on major financial obligations or having to rely on new consumer credit during the applicable period. Lastly, lenders will need to vet the information that they are using for the residual income determination. The CFPB allows for varying levels of technological sophistication on this point. For example, at the most basic level, a lender may collect consumers' statements of income and expenses supported by hard copy documentation. Various technology solutions exist that also present this information in the form of recent bank account activity upon consumer authorization. Another option is a rule of thumb dollar amount estimate that the lender may derive based on their analysis of the typical size of the cushion required for basic living expenses. This particularly applies to housing expenses, as the CFPB has recognized as valid the use of geo-aggregated average housing expenses of similarly situated consumers. The highest level of sophistication is the big data approach, in which lenders access third-party databases in real time to obtain values for the consumer's income and expenses. Regardless of the approach a lender chooses to use, it will be incumbent upon them to demonstrate the soundness of their calculation of the consumer's residual income. Moving beyond simple check-the-box compliance, Factor Trust sees opportunities for lenders to enhance their existing decision strategies with the introduction of potentially new data to the mix. First, lenders should not adopt the mindset that they'll now have to run risk screening and ATR screening on every application. When the compliance and risk components are staged in a sequence, consumers failing an earlier stage drop out and need not continue through the remaining screens. Therefore, it is in lenders' best interests to proactively test ATR compliance solutions now in the context of their existing risk strategies. Doing so will grant them ample time to prepare their next-generation decision waterfall that stages risk and ATR or ATR and risk in sequence. Second, lenders will have to assess a consumer's comprehensive array of debt obligations when making a residual income determination. Doing so will require pulling mainstream debt obligations from a traditional bureau in addition to covered loan obligations from an RIS. Traditional FCRA credit file data can be dual-purposed to find predictive lift over alternative credit data already pulled today. Factor Trust has found in its work with Equifax that blending the two files to produce the comprehensive picture of consumers' credit histories indeed drives improved risk ranking and coverage. Third, lenders of covered loans should consider the value of real-time dynamic loan optimization in light of the new ATR compliance requirements. For example, a credit-qualified consumer that may have been approved in yesterday's decision strategy may no longer pass the necessary residual income requirements imposed by the new rule. However, there's still hope if the lender can fit that consumer into the right-sized loan product for them, which may consist of either a lower loan amount, an extended term, or other features that accommodate the consumer's restricted financial capacity. Conversely, credit-qualified consumers that are temporarily ineligible to borrow per one of the CFPB's presumptions of unaffordability could be graduated to an upstream credit product not covered by the rule proposal if the lender offers such loans. In either scenario, dynamic loan optimization enables the lender to assess the consumer's unique risk and ATR dimensions in real time and route the consumer to the best available loan product with the speed of a live transaction. Finally, lenders can realize gains in fraud prevention when validating consumers' stated incomes and stated living expenses. Consumers stating values far out of line with lenders' expectations may fail validation and be subject to additional verification. Thus, lenders should look for opportunities to dual-purpose the process of vetting inputs to residual income for enhanced fraud prevention. Combining our analysis of these and other issues, along with our expert knowledge of the rule proposal and extensive solicitation of customer input, FactorTrust has developed Lend Protect ATR to help lenders comply with the new rule and take advantage of newly required data inputs. The solution begins with a comprehensive data and attribution, which combines FactorTrust's covered loan histories, Equifax traditional credit file data, and public source data on income and expenses. FactorTrust offers its covered loan lookback as an automated check against its database of the various business rules comprising the CFPB's presumptions of unaffordability. Further, FactorTrust performs real-time validation of consumer-stated values of income, housing expenses, and basic living expenses against its lengthy history of consumer-stated incomes and geo-aggregated income and expense data, which FactorTrust has modeled down to the unique characteristics of the underbanked population. We also calculate and return to the lender a residual income dollar amount value using data collected from the consumer, queried from alternative and traditional credit report data, and validated with modeled public sources. To enhance underwriting, FactorTrust developed a brand new FCRA attribute and score suite that blends FactorTrust and Equifax data together. The attributes capture consumer borrowing capacity metrics such as debt to income, disposable income, and existing payment obligations. Brand new predictive capacity scores leverage these new attributes for enhanced risk prediction driven solely by the consumer's capacity to repay characteristics. Finally, FactorTrust has developed the loan decision optimization tool in which lenders can specify their waterfall criteria of various decision strategy elements such as risk scores, capacity scores, and residual incomes. The resulting transaction response includes all of the compliance components, attributes, scores, and recommendation to the lender of the right loan product and pricing based on the loan optimization. In addition to assessment of a consumer's ability to repay covered loans, lenders will need to comply with the new rules via their reporting to registered information systems as defined by the CFPB. While technically no RISs will be registered until after the rule is finalized, it behooves lenders to develop an awareness now of the alternative credit reporting landscape. Alternative credit bureaus, like FactorTrust, are the businesses already in existence today that are the most similar to the CFPB's notion of an RIS. And it follows that these businesses are the most likely to apply to the CFPB to be recognized as RISs. Becoming familiar with the existing precedent can only help with later reporting compliance. Furthermore, the CFPB has proposed an RIS credit reporting ecosystem in which lenders report to all and pull from one. However, a common data reporting format such as Metro 2 does not exist today among the alternative bureaus. So lenders should start considering today the effort and resources needed to report loan information in multiple different data formats. Moreover, the CFPB expects lenders to report covered loans as quickly as practical, which FactorTrust has found for much of the alternative lending industry tends to be real-time reporting. Thus, lenders should begin developing a plan now for how they will report in multiple data formats in real time. To assist lenders with reporting compliance, FactorTrust has developed the CRA Gateway, a sophisticated, secure technology solution that eases lenders' burdens by facilitating their multi-threaded reporting for them. The CRA Gateway is a portal that the lender can report a loan transaction to once, after which FactorTrust translates the lender's reported data into the various formats of its final destinations. The Gateway enables reporting compliance while taking much of the heavy lifting off of the lender. We conclude today with a summary of actions lenders should begin taking now to ensure they will be compliant with the new rule. While the rule is not yet finalized, the latest proposal conveys the meat of what the CFPB hopes to accomplish in the industry, along with several strong indications of how it expects it to be accomplished. As you can see, there is a lot of work to be done by lenders to get ready. In the immediate near term, lenders should submit their comments to the CFPB before the window closes on October 7th. Also this year, lenders should evaluate their internal readiness for compliance regarding areas such as resources, IT capabilities, and current gaps they'll need to fill in the next 2 years. Next year, lenders should be on their way to remediating gaps in their current processes. As part of this, they should conduct research and development of next-generation decision models and waterfalls that include new data inputs required by the rule. In 2018, lenders should focus on implementing the required changes for which they have laid the foundation, either internally or through the use of third-party services. With the exact effective date of the rule still unknown, lenders should act now to make doubly sure that they are already compliant on day one of rule enforcement. We thank you very much for your time today, and with that, I'll hand it back to Mike for our question and answer session.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. And we do, in fact, have some time for some questions, and I actually see a lot of great questions coming into the queue. So it's a great start, and if anybody's got something that they're thinking about asking, now would definitely be the time. So let's see here. Let me go ahead and kick off the first question, and I'm going to direct this one for Dan. Okay, how should the lender ensure trustworthiness of the consumer in self-reported income expenses? Does the CFPB provide recommendations?
So in the current rule proposal, the recommendations provided by the CFPB in part involve verification and this term of verification, which, coming from an analytic sense, I interpret that as being a truth set of independently verified information. What I would really view here in terms of a more feasible approach to ensuring the trustworthiness of the information is statistical validation of what a consumer says that either they make on the income side or what their expenditures are on the other side of the budget. From the standpoint that when we think of third-party databases available on the market for these different expense or income categories, some of them out there are very high quality. You are going to find a lack of complete coverage in a lot of those sources, and so there are ample public sources available that capture the income tendencies and the expense tendencies by geography. And the CFPB in their rule proposal does certainly speak to the use of geo-aggregated estimates for housing expenses. So certainly Factor Trust's view on this is that the CFPB should consider adopting a similar view when it comes to incomes and expenses, that that data that the consumer is stating be validated by its reasonableness within the bounds of the bell curve for their geography. Great question.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks, Dan. All right. Next question here. Let me loop Barb into the discussion. Regarding the NPR and implementation timeline, does the incoming administration have control to shape the 2019 date, or is that an independent institutional limitation?
Well, currently it's called the proposed rule. So what we're waiting for is it to become a final rule. And the question I believe that's being asked is there a set date that the CFPB must hit to have the rule be finalized? Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? The answer is there is not a specific date in which they have to have this rule finalized, but there is history behind their prior adoption of proposed rules and final rules that we can look at for guidance, such as the gathering of comments, which if you look on the website, there's already thousands of comments that have been entered. They can have studies that are sent out, consumer surveys that are sent out, and they can have additional hearings. So as we've seen recently with the debt collection rules, that the ANPR was sent out in 2013, and most recently we had an outline that was sent in by the CFPB. It wasn't the final rules. So that was almost 3 years. So no, there is not a specific date they must have this finished.
Great, thank you, Barb. Okay, let's see. Next question here. And the question is, Metro 2 format makes it very difficult for lenders to report biweekly activity. Do you have any suggestions? Will CFPB force bureaus to accept biweekly and change their definitions?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So certainly there remains initially the question of will the what's known as the big three nationwide credit bureaus, will they register as RISs? Because my understanding of the rule is that lenders will be required to report their covered loans to RISs, not necessarily report covered loans to every credit bureau on the market. So in terms of reporting in Metro 2 and reporting these types of loans in Metro 2, should the nationwide credit bureaus become RISs, Factor Trust itself has been collecting Metro 2 data for a few years now. We've done work in the auto space where we've seen our data on unsecured consumer loans and short-term loans find really real value, real predictive value for subprime auto lenders. So we've collected their Metro 2 loan reports, and as part of our work on the CRA Gateway, we've translated our proprietary spec of short-term loans and installment loans into the Metro 2 format. That's part of our core intellectual property there in terms of our CRA Gateway. And we have already begun engaging the big three bureaus. In the event that they become RISs, we will be prepared to work with them and work through those issues on the frequency and those various idiosyncrasies that you see in this short-term loan market.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. Okay, your next question for Barb. If we do not do loans for less than 45-day terms or at rates above 36% APR, do we need to be concerned about this rule?
Well, that's a sort of a nuanced question as far as how the loan will be structured. So let's go back to the definition of covered loan. So first we had a loan payment terms of 45 days or less, or a loan with a term of 45 days or longer with an all-in percentage rate of 36%. And then there's this important word, and. So everyone needs to remember the and connects to the 36%, which is repaid directly from the consumer's account or a vehicle, secured by the vehicle. So here's an example. You make a car loan of 6 months or greater at 40% interest. I'm making this up. And you make the loan with a security agreement on that vehicle. So that's going to fit the covered loan definition. Or, for example, if you make a short-term loan of, say, 4 months, and it's at a rate of 50%, but it's secured by the consumer's income, that's going to be a covered loan. So it really depends on how the loan is structured, not just the interest rate. Good question, though.
Excellent. Thank you, Barb. Okay, let's see here. Next question. Go ahead and ask Dan, what does the rule say about record keeping of ability to repay decisions?
Sure. Great question. The CFPB's rule proposal includes a requirement for the lender to retain documentation on the ability to repay assessment. And this is for 36 months after the covered loan ceases to be outstanding. So that means that whether the loan is closed in good standing or charge-off, from 36 months after the closure date, the lender will have to be able to produce the decision elements that the lender used to determine that, yes, indeed, this consumer appeared to have the ability to repay the loan at the time of origination. So Factor Trust will help lenders comply with the record-keeping requirements through its compliance dashboard, which will enable the querying of historical transactions that ran through our system. This data can be used to prove to an auditor that the lender was indeed complying with the ATR rules. So, great question.
Thanks very much. And here's another one for you, Dan. You mentioned child support payments. Why only those?
Yeah, so those family obligations, I believe those are called out in the rule as expenses, as Olivia said. So, we draw attention to those from the standpoint of, what we read in the rule content.
Great, thank you. All right, scanning through here. Great questions. Okay. When can lenders test Factor Trust's ATR solution?
Yeah, I'll take that one again. Actually, now. Several lenders are currently retro-testing LendProtect ATR, which, as a reminder, comprises the spectrum of decision strategy elements that we covered today. To test the solution, lenders provide Factor Trust a historical input file of consumer applications along with consumer PII and consumer stated income. Factor Trust returns a depersonalized file retro-scored back to the time of application. The return file contains compliance elements such as the covered loan look-back and residual income dollar amount, along with the capacity attribute and score suite that blends Factor Trust and Equifax data. Factor Trust will also provide back a summary analysis of the lender's file to provide personalized guidance on what to look for. And I will note here that the CRA Gateway won't be subject to retro testing per se, as it is less an analytic solution and much more a technology capability that integrated lenders can use for their reporting needs.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. All right, here, another question for Barb. Is Factor Trust submitting a comment letter to the CFPB, and if so, what's your angle?
Well, yes, we will be submitting a comment, and without giving away all of our angles, we have some things that we've covered today that we've talked about as considerations. So we've talked about validation and considering a consumer's stated expenses. We've also talked about the fact the rule doesn't talk about consumers that are on a cash-based income. So we're looking at the subprime market, and a lot of the people out there that would be applicants for these covered loans are people that are living on a cash-based income, and that's not expressed in the current rule. The other thing is to become a registered information system, there's got to be some strict barriers to entry, and the rule outlines some of those for eligibility, and we agree with some of those, and we have some ideas of our own we'll be expressing. So thank you. That's a good question as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, Barb. And okay, so I think we've gotten through a lot of the questions here that we can take. There's some questions here that are very specific for the folks that have asked, so we'll answer those at a later point. As I said, we'll be following up. But we've got a few minutes to the top of the hour, but I think everyone's always happy to get a few minutes back from their day, or back for their day. So let me, first of all, thank Barb and Dan. It's been a great almost hour of discussion. We had wonderful content, very informative, and judging by all the questions we got, really clearly resonated with the audience. Thank you, everyone, for being here, of course. Trust me when I say we would not want to do it without you. So thank you for attending, and thank you for participating in that earlier poll. We will be sending you an email soon in the next couple days. Keep an eye out for that, please. It will have a link to the recording, and it will also have a link to the slides that you've seen. So you can review the slides and the recording at your leisure once you get that email from us. So, keep an eye out. And with that, I guess I will wrap it up. Wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you'll join us again here very soon. Thanks so much.